And it looks like just about everybody has already logged in. Good afternoon. I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to our 4-H Virtual Science Café. If you'd take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat box, that would be great. If anybody would like to use the closed caption service, go to the box where it says CC, click on that, and you can view subtitles. I'm going to launch a quick poll, and I'd love to know how you heard about us today. In the meantime, I'm going to welcome you. I'm Laura Wilson. I'm a 4-H science professional with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. 4-H is a community for all kids with programs that suit a variety of backgrounds, interests, and schedules, from in-school to after-school, clubs and camps. 4-H is a positive youth development organization, and our programs are available in your local community. And we welcome every kid who wants to have fun, learn, and grow. 4-H is the youth development program of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. As you take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat box, share your name, what town you're tuning in from. Here at Maine 4-H, we also have Alice Philbrick, who is monitoring the chat today, and Jesse Brainerd is going to be hosting our Q&A. So they're working behind the scenes so that this all runs smoothly for you. We're going to keep it super simple. Our guest will share some of her cool research and share a bit about herself. And today she has some really cool photos to share as well. I'm really excited about talking about trash. We're going to then have plenty of time for you to ask your questions. We're going to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to get questions to her. Jessie will read those questions out loud to her. We cannot see you and we cannot hear you. So you're going to have to use the Q&A box to get questions to our speaker. And a note about chat, we'd love to see your reactions to what our guest presents, but please keep on topic, keep the language clean and appropriate, and that way we can leave the chat open. And again, once again, if anyone would like to use the closed caption service, go to the box where it says CC, click on View Subtitles. So it's great to have you here today. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Erin McDonald. Dr. McDonald, I'd love for you to tell our participants about yourself and your work. And you are muted.
Got it. Thank you very much. I'm going to start here. I'm going to get my screen shared with everyone. So I'm very happy to be here. My name is Erin McDonald, and I am the 4-H Youth Professional 4-H Youth Development Professional for York County as part of the Cooperative Extension for University of Maine. So if anyone out there is from York County, hey, thanks for coming, representing our county. Before I became a 4-H professional, I was an archaeologist, and so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my path to archaeology, what archaeology is, and then what some of my research was. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So before we get started, I'm interested in seeing actually how many of you know what archaeologists actually study. So we have a poll to see some of your knowledge about archaeology.
So I can see how many of you vote, but I can't see what you say. So feel free to pick your best answer today. And as soon as about everybody votes, I'll share the results. These guys are quick today, Erin.
Oh, good.
So just about everybody has voted. This is great. I'm going to share the results now. Check it out.
All of the above. Okay. So we got one person who got it spot on, and then the rest of you got it partially right, because it's ancient cultures. Archaeologists do not study dinosaurs. That is a common misconception. That's paleontologists. Archaeologists study ancient people, ancient cultures. If you think about Indiana Jones, digging up stuff in ancient Egypt, and geologists are who study rocks. So archaeologists just stick with people and stuff that people made. So you'll learn a lot about, and that's the most important thing. We don't study dinosaurs. So remember that. If you don't learn anything else, remember that. Let's get started. A little bit about me. I grew up in Arizona, which was a great place to be interested in archaeology. There's lots of archaeology there, lots of open space where people had lived in the past. And so I was interested in it from a very early age. And while I was in high school, I had the opportunity to study or to intern with Old Pueblo Archaeology Center. So even before I went to college, I was able to handle artifacts and clean them and just sort of help out around the center and learn about what some of the things are that archaeologists do. And I ended up going to the University of Arizona for undergrad. And what was really great about that is that it was a mile from my house. It was really convenient. And also the University of Arizona has a really great anthropology department. And so it worked out perfectly that I could study archaeology there. And I keep saying anthropology and archaeology. I'll get to that in a second, just clarifying what those mean. While I was an undergrad, I got a job working at the Arizona State Museum, which is on the University of Arizona campus. And all of the archaeological material that is excavated in Arizona eventually ends up at the Arizona State Museum, where it goes into storage so that people can research it and we hold on to it and keep it safe. And so as a student worker there, I got to handle lots of artifacts from just 100 years old to thousands of years old, and a variety of different types of artifacts, cataloging them and taking pictures of them to go into storage. From there, so I graduated with my bachelor's degree in anthropology from the University of Arizona. I decided to go to England to get a master's degree. And I ended up at the University of Cambridge, and I got a master's degree in archaeology. I had a lot of really great experiences there and opportunities that most people don't get. I was able to cross the rope barrier at Stonehenge and actually stand next to the stones, which most people don't get to do. So there's a lot of really great opportunities in archaeology. And then after that, I ended up at the University of Buffalo in Buffalo, New York, to get my PhD. And I went to Buffalo specifically because there was a professor there who was working on a project in Ireland, and I was very interested in doing my own research in Ireland. So it worked out well that I could work on this project with this professor and eventually make contacts with other researchers in Ireland to develop my own dissertation project. And so I graduated from there. And then I ended up a couple years later here in Maine. So like I said, I wanted to clarify what archaeology and anthropology are. So anthropology is the study of people. And typically there are 4 different sort of sub specialties in anthropology. Archaeology is one of them, so looking at people from the past. Physical anthropology is looking at the human body, a lot of times the skeleton, and that can be skeletons from the past, or it can be skeletons from more modern populations. Then you have cultural anthropology, looking at modern populations and modern cultures, and then linguistic anthropology that looks at language and human language and how we speak and the different languages we use and the way we communicate. And so my focus was on archaeology, but my degree was in anthropology. So why archaeology? Oh, before I go on, any questions so far? No?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, so now we're getting into the interesting stuff. So why archaeology? Why even study archaeology? One of the main things is that archaeology helps to preserve objects, places, and knowledge. So if it's buried in the ground, we don't always know that it's there. And if a construction project is going to go through, like they're putting in a new pipeline or widening a road, if we don't go in, if archaeologists don't go in and sort of explore that area and dig it up, it'll just get covered or destroyed by that construction. So when archaeologists go in and excavate or dig up the artifacts, we're preserving those objects. It may be that there are certain places that are very important in history or in particular cultures, and so we're able to preserve those places, and then we preserve knowledge about the past. And so that's one of the biggest things. And we also, archaeology is the pursuit of knowledge about the human condition. So we have a sort of shared history, a shared prehistory as human beings, but also different cultures around the world, cultures that maybe don't exist anymore, cultures that still exist and have a very long history. And so using archaeology, we can gain more knowledge about ourselves as a species and as different people around the world. And then another reason to do archaeology as well is to complement the historical record. So, why do archaeology if everything's, if we have things that are written down telling us the way the past was? Sometimes what's written down doesn't tell the full picture. And so archaeology can help fill that picture out. A lot of times, if you think about history and who wrote it down in the United States, it was typically someone who was educated, and I'm talking about in the past, writing things down in the past, someone who was educated, and to get educated, oftentimes you needed to have money, and oftentimes the people who were educated were men. And so that leaves out a significant part of the population. We don't know what women were doing because they weren't writing down what they were doing necessarily. So archaeology helps to fill out some of those details and find answers about people who weren't writing things down. Now, we can't talk to dead people, so we use cultural material. Cultural material is everything that humans have made. So if you look around the room that you're sitting in right now, unless you're sitting in the woods, you are surrounded by cultural material. You have paper and pencils and furniture and a house around you. These are all things that humans have made with their hands, and these are artifacts, and these are structures or features. And so archaeologists use these things to look at the past. And it's basically the material that people left behind. So they're trash. People don't leave behind the things that are really valuable to them. They leave behind their garbage, the stuff that's not as important. And so that's why this talk is called Talking Trash, because archaeologists are really looking at ancient garbage. And so here we have a picture of a few different types of cultural material. We have some arrowheads. The ones in the bottom are from a few thousand years ago in Western New York. The different pieces of broken pottery that you see sort of in the middle here, those are from Ireland from the 18th and 19th century. We've got, I don't know, my mouse, you can't see my mouse, but there's a pipe stem in there as well. So before cigarettes, you had clay pipes, and so there's some of that. And then an arrowhead from about 5,000 years ago from Ireland. And cultural material, I mean, this is just a sample of what you can find. It is basically anything that humans made that has been preserved in the ground. So now, I want you can write this in the chat box if you want. Look at some of this trash here and think about who made this cultural material. Can you determine just by looking at these things something about the person that made it? Who was it? Where do they live? What do they eat? How old are they? Is it a man or a woman? Is this information that you can figure out from this? So just take a minute and you can just write in the chat box like, you think it's a man and some of these things are, what they ate, but think about what it is if you can identify what it is. And we'll just take a minute to do that. And Jesse, if you want to tell me some of the things that are popping up in the chat box, because I can't. Oh, wait. Yes, I can. My mouse isn't quite working right. Here we go.
Would it be easier for you if I read you the things in there?
No, I got it now. Yeah, my mouse is being a little weird, but I think I got it. All right,
No
so people wrote food wrappers. Yep, so we've got some food in there. Maybe a child. This is a child, and these are some of their snacks. Yep. Okay, someone else is saying a woman because there's a tea bag and part of a package of candles. Okay. Candle box top. Yep, so everyone's picking up on the candles. Someone says family, maybe Jewish. I'm guessing again because of the candles. It says part of the word of Hanukkah, right? There's a little pill package there. Yep. Good. So these are, you know, all the different things we see here. We've got a tea bag, the cardboard box, a pill, you know, a pill packet. So yeah, these are all things, these are possibilities, and based on your knowledge of where this material came from and maybe what else was found around it, you could extrapolate who it was that made this material. Now, archaeologists don't have someone who comes and tells them, you're right, that's what it was. So I'm not going to tell you who made this cultural material. It doesn't matter. The idea is that you are looking at and trying to figure that out based on your knowledge of your own culture. Oops. Okay, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritties here. We've got, so excavation, in case anyone has heard me say that and is unsure what it means, it's to expose, to lay bare by digging. So this is one of the main things that archaeologists are known for doing, going out and digging. And here I have some examples of the tools of the trade, some of the tools that archaeologists typically use. Now, some of the techniques and tools that you use on an archaeological dig will vary depending on where you are in the world and what the site is. So if you're someplace maybe in ancient Egypt or ancient Greece, where there's a lot of archaeological material because there's a lot of history, people have been living there for a really long time, there may be some more delicate material there. So you may be using a trowel and brushes a lot more than something like a shovel. Most of the archaeology that I've done has been in areas I've done archaeology in Ireland and Western New York and in the Southwestern United States. And for the most part, we have used shovels, sometimes pickaxes, and also our trowels, which are the smaller tools. And so the examples that you see here are digging bigger holes using shovels rather than some of the delicate things. So you can see all the different arrows. We have buckets, shovels, tape measure, a line level, and string to mark out where we're digging, a screen to sift through the dirt to find artifacts, a trowel. You can see me in the picture here in the orange shirt. I have a trowel in my hand, and I'm sort of pushing through the dirt to sift through it. And the other picture of me with the Red Sox hat on, I'm holding what's called a munsell, and it is basically a bunch of different colors, and we use that to help us record the color of the soil. We record everything. The color of the soil, the texture of the soil, how deep we went, where we found different artifacts, and all of that. And then you can see in both pictures, people have clipboards and pencils with paperwork, recording everything. So now I have a poll for you. What do you think is the archaeologist's most important tool?
This is a quick group. They're up to 80% have already voted. So I'm going to give them about 30 more seconds and then we'll close the poll and share it.
They're confident about their answers.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'm going to share the answers.
All right, very good. So all of these tools that I've listed are important, but paperwork is the most important because you record everything. This is science, and it's really important that things get recorded. Part of this is because you can't re-excavate an area. If you dig a hole someplace and you're pulling out different artifacts and you're recording the soil and the soil color and soil texture, when you're done with that, you fill it back in. You can't really go back 2 years later and re-excavate it because none of the artifacts are going to be there. The soil texture might be a little bit different because you've mixed it around and everything. So it's really important that you record things right off the bat, right as you're doing it, so that you can go back and look at your notes and see what you found. And also for future researchers, they can go back and look at your notes and say, you know, they did this, they found these particular artifacts, but you know, the way they recorded it, you know, shows something a little bit different. And so sometimes techniques change in science. And so it's really good to see how people dug things in the past and how they recorded them, because that may impact how people interpret the findings later on. So paperwork is the most important, even though that's the least exciting part. It's the most important. Any questions?
Nope, we're good. I think they're all saving them up for the end.
Okay, that works. Just keeping an eye on my time here. I don't want to overtalk. Okay, so the scale of the excavation, how big it is, how much of an area you're excavating, really changes depending on the types of questions you're asking. So archaeologists don't just go out and like, you know what, this looks like a good place to dig, let's dig here, and then uncover all of this area. They go out with particular questions that they want to answer. And it could be about a way that, you know, wanting to know more about the way people were farming or the types of tools they were using. And they pick areas to excavate very specifically. However, there are instances where the archaeologist doesn't necessarily get to choose where they excavate, and because there's going to be construction. And I mentioned this before, doing archaeology before construction is really important so that material doesn't get destroyed. So the size of the excavation, the type of excavation you do really depends on the types of questions you're asking, and also the size of the area that could possibly be affected by construction. So the two different pictures I have here, the one in the middle, you can see this is out in the Southwest. I was on this dig right after I graduated from college, and it's in the desert, and there's a really big area open. We've got a lot of area that's being excavated, and there was going to be a fiber optic cable going through this area over multiple states. And so it was a huge area that was going to be impacted. And so we were excavating the entire area that where this cable was going to be going through. And so we had, you know, it was a very long process. And I wasn't even part of the excavation for the full thing. Just a part of it because it takes a long time, but you can see the scale of it, it was really big, and this is only part of the site. In this other picture down in the left-hand corner, this is in Ireland, and it's a much smaller area that we're excavating. You can see it's actually a 2 meter by 1 meter rectangle, and we actually dug multiple of those. So small, but we dug several of them. And this is because my friend Jen, who was working on her PhD, and she's got the pink bandana in that picture, this was for her research, and she was, you know, looking at some very specific questions that she wanted to answer, and opening up a huge area was just really not feasible for the amount of time, the amount of people that she could have excavating with her, and it also wouldn't necessarily have answered the questions that she wanted answered. So the scale of the project was much smaller. And then I have this great thing that I found, one of my friends shared with me. all the different names that archaeologists have for the different types of holes that we dig, but they're all basically holes. They're just different sizes, different shapes, and for different purposes. Okay, so we've talked about excavation, and that's the thing that that people usually think about when they hear archaeologists going out and digging, getting dirty and finding things in the ground. But that's not all that archaeologists do, and there are many reasons why an archaeologist might not excavate. And so I have two images here. So the project that I worked on in Ireland, the professor did some LiDAR, which I'm not going to get into too much, but it sort of does some X-raying of the ground to find archaeology, and it can help you sort of pinpoint where excavation might be useful, or it might answer your questions without even having to excavate. And so in the left-hand picture, you can see me, it was a very cold day in my yellow rain jacket, and we are sort of ground truthing for the LiDAR, doing some of the work on the ground so that when the people flying the little airplane overhead taking pictures, we could compare those and get the data out of it. Another part of the project in Ireland, in the right-hand picture, we were doing soil testing. So over a wide area, we were taking small samples of the soil to look at the chemical composition of it. And if it had a lot of phosphate in it, the chemical phosphate, that sometimes is indicative of areas where people were living, because phosphate comes from animal waste and human waste and all of our garbage. As it breaks down, it puts phosphate into the soil. So you can find areas where people were living based on that. And so these are sometimes preliminary things before you do excavation, or things that you can do in place of excavation. So I have a poll here for you. Why might an archaeologist want to avoid excavating?
I think they're being very thoughtful in their responses, but we're already up to over 85% of our attendees have responded. So I'm going to give about 30 more seconds so those last couple can join in. Oh, everybody's responded. All right, awesome. I'm going to share those results.
Very good. Yeah, so this is great. So all of the above is the correct answer. It is expensive and time consuming to do excavations. It takes a long time to do it. If you're excavating a large area, that'll take even longer, and you need a lot of people in order to do it. Archaeologists rarely work by themselves. It's often a team effort because just in order to accomplish an excavation, you need to have a lot of people out there digging. Sometimes the research questions, like I said, can be answered using other techniques. You don't necessarily need to excavate. It might be that some of the questions you're asking about particular artifacts can be answered because someone has already excavated in a different area for the same culture that you're interested in, and there's a bunch of artifacts that you can look at, and that'll answer your question. So you don't need to go out and excavate and get more artifacts if you already have them. Sensitivity to local belief systems. This is really important, particularly in the United States, but also in Canada, Australia, anywhere around the world where there are indigenous populations who have been there for a very, very long time and have important or deep connections with the land, or they may have burial grounds or sacred spots. And so you may avoid excavating because there's some sensitivity about that. You don't want to create problems and sort of offend the local people there. And so you may end up having to either excavate someplace else or figure out a different way to answer the questions you're asking. So this is an example, just going back to the LiDAR. And I'm just going to talk about this very quickly because I'm running out of time. So this is just an example of LiDAR in use. It's been being used a lot in Central America right now to look for Maya and Aztec settlements, because the jungle grows up so quickly that sometimes it's really hard to see when you're standing on the ground what's there. And so excavating can be really difficult. So using LiDAR actually reveals some of the structures that are being hidden by the jungle. And so you can see some of the pyramids here, the Maya city of Tikal. But if you look at the image, this sort of green, yellow, and orange image, there are a lot more structures on there than there are in the photograph. And so you can see that these aren't necessarily things you would have found if you were just walking around on the ground. And so LiDAR can really be helpful in helping to illuminate some things that are hidden by vegetation. And then there are a lot of different ways you can specialize in archaeology as well that doesn't necessarily have to do with excavation. So you can do petrography, which is studying ceramics or pottery. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath because I'm so excited. Hold on a second. You can study bones. So it can either be zoo archaeology, studying animal bones. If you think about the things we eat now, like chickens and cows, those all have bones and they get left behind. And so by studying them, you can get an idea of what people were eating. You can do things like GIS, mapping. That's really important with archaeology. And then you can do paleobotany, which is studying past plants. And that goes right into what I was studying for my dissertation. So I ended up not doing any excavation. I did pollen analysis. And the reason I chose to do pollen, and hopefully you all know what pollen is, everyone's allergic to it, you know, especially this time of year. All the trees and flowers are blooming. Pollen preserves really well. It's a very hard substance, and it preserves in bogs in really wet areas really well. And so I was able to look at that, and I'll get to that in a second. So the reason I chose to look at pollen is that the particular period of time that I was interested in Ireland, so the Iron Age, about 1500 to 2500 years ago, there are very few artifacts, there's no pottery, and communities left very little trace on the landscape. They didn't build permanent houses, and so we don't really know where they went. The period before this, they were building houses and they were making pottery, but during the Iron Age, they stopped doing that. So what I was interested in was looking at the pollen that was blown into bogs and preserved for thousands of years, and then look at the types of pollen there that was preserved to then determine how the land was being used. Were people farming it for crops? Were they clearing the land to make pasture for their animals? Was it a combination of both? And then from there, I can figure out things like, well, how might people have been organizing themselves? If they're creating pastures and they're primarily, you know, moving with their herds, they're not going to be staying in one spot necessarily all the time. And so just to give you an example of different landscapes and what different pollen they would produce, I have a few pictures here. So the one on the left, this is in Ireland, and you can see there's a lot of pasture. There are a few trees, but it's mostly open grassland. So you'd have grass and other little weeds that would grow, maybe things like buttercup and other small weeds that exist within pastures or meadowland. That's going to have very different pollen than the picture on the right, which is full of trees. There's much less grass you can see, and trees produce a lot of pollen. And so that's going to be different as well. And then in the bottom picture, this is sort of a combination of some of that grassland, but then there's also crops. That yellow, that's it's called rapeseed, and it's made for like, it's what, canola oil, or not canola oil. Yeah, basically canola oil is made from a cooking oil. And that picture is in England, but you'd get pollen from a crop there. So it's very, 3 different landscapes will produce different types of pollen. And so I went to 4 different bogs in Ireland. I thought I had a picture here for you guys. Oh yeah, So this is Ireland. The yellow here is where all the bogs are, lots of bogs in Ireland. So I collected samples from each bog, 4 different bogs, and I was in a lab then processing all of this. And I was counting pollen grains. So from the bogs, I would take samples and then I would process them through some chemicals and then put them on a slide and look at them in a microscope. And on each slide, I counted at least 500 pollen grains. And so in total, I counted over 16,000 pollen grains for my research, and that took a very long time. And you can see on this slide, it's not just pollen, there's all sorts of other stuff on there. So it takes a long time to sort of sift through all of that material. Any questions?
I don't have any in the Q&A, but I have one for you when you're ready. Well, I was just wondering, thinking about how you found all those pollen grains, because I know you said you did field work in New York and in Ireland, what is the most surprising thing that you found doing either in slides or when actually out in the field doing the digging?
So in Ireland, what's the most surprising thing, or just in general?
Or just in general, maybe in both places. And also there is a comment here that your dog is cute in the picture, and I would
can you see
that.
Yeah, he's behaving himself. I keep worrying he's gonna bark, but he'll whine if I kick him out of the house or out of the room. Yeah, I'm not sure. The most surprising thing, I think actually the most surprising thing was how hard it was to learn how to identify the pollen, and that that there is so much other stuff on the slides and so many other things that you could look at. So on the slide I have in yellow circled, those are different pollen grains. So I have a hazel tree pollen in the sort of top left. In the middle, that's it's a grass pollen, but it's extra big, so it's indicative of like something like wheat. And then in the bottom, I have another hazel pollen. The 2 red circles are the pollen that I put in there as like a control. So I added it on purpose, and I knew how much there was of it. And then the blue circle is an amoeba. So there are a lot of different amoebas that are in the bogs that survive in very specific conditions. So some really like very wet conditions, some prefer slightly drier conditions. And so you can tell based on the numbers of those different amoebas how wet or dry the bog was. And so that was surprising to me too, sort of going through that and realizing that I wasn't just recording the pollen, I was looking at all these other things and just really seeing an ecosystem in the slide. And sometimes little bits of like tiny microscopic insects would show up, and I'd see like a jaw of like a microscopic insect, and that was just really crazy. And I'm like, what is this? And so those were things that were really interesting. And I spent a lot of time at the microscope looking at those things.
Speaking of a lot of time, we did get the question, how did you have the patience to do that?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it is just the interest and knowing that in order to answer the questions that I'm asking, you know, I have to sit there and I have to look at it. And, you know, there are things that you do. So I'm realizing now that you're saying my dog was cute because the picture, not because he's in the room with me. Anyway, I listened to audiobooks. I listen to music, because while I'm at the microscope for hours and hours and hours, it's sort of, you know, you're just looking and writing down what you see, but your brain isn't really actively working. So part of the way I got through it was listening to other things, and that helped me get through it, and taking lots of breaks, and of course having my dog by my side. But yeah, it takes definitely, it's not for everyone. It really isn't. So this is then one of the results for one of the bogs. Normally this diagram would be turned horizontally, but I felt it might be easier for you to look at it this way. So in the bottom 2 arrows, I'm pointing out where you see on the graph, it dips down a little bit. And that's elm. One of those bars is elm trees, and one of them is ash trees. And you can see a dip in those bars and how it goes down. And that's showing a decrease in tree pollen, which means that those trees are being cut down. And they might be cutting down those trees to make fields. And it could be for planting crops, or it could be for creating pasture for their animals. And so you see in the upper two arrows, the grass family. So you see an increase in grass, which would make sense. If you're clearing the trees, the grass is going to grow. You're going to see more grass pollen. And also an increase in Plantago lanceolata, which it's plantain. Don't think of the bananas. It's a weed that grows everywhere. We have it here as well, but it is very often associated with pasture. It just grows in those types of conditions where there's grass and there aren't crops in there. And so this diagram really shows me that at this point in time, the land was being cleared for pasture. And so that's how, looking at all these different types of pollen that I was counting and identifying, there are certain pollen grains that really indicate particular types of landscapes. And so I did this for the 4 different bogs, and then was able to compare them to see the types of activity that were going on in the landscape. So Rawson, Calverstown, Broadford, and the last one, Ballycolleen. These are the 4 bogs that I looked at, and they're lined up based on time. And you see things that say clearance and regeneration and limited activity. Clearance means that's where I see a huge dip in the number of trees. So the trees are being cleared. And then regeneration or limited activity means that I'm seeing an increase in trees and maybe a decrease in grass. So it's indicating changes, and this is over hundreds of years. So we're seeing there are periods of time where we see evidence of the lands being cleared, and it could be, again, for pasture or for fields. And then other times where the trees start to grow back. And so maybe people have left that land, have moved to someplace else, or maybe they're just not using that land as much, or they've changed their activity that they're doing. And so these are the different things that I was looking at to see when and how people were changing the land. And so you can see pretty consistently, I have Rawson, Broadford, and Ballycolleen. Generally speaking, their major clearances are around the same time. Calverstown Bog stood out as being different, and so I don't really know what was going on there. It could be that people were doing things a little bit differently in that area, but when they were clearing things, it was different than when other areas were clearing the land. And so, I was then determining that during these certain periods of activity, people may have been staying in one spot for a while. And then in the areas where the land is regenerating or there's limited activity, people are maybe moving around more. And so they're less permanent, and therefore having a more limited impact on the land. So any questions about that?
I don't see any right now. Just a reminder, if anybody has questions, you can type those into the Q&A box or into the chat box, and I will read those out to Erin.
Yep, and I'm just about done. There's 1 slide or 2 slides left.
You know what? We actually just had one pop up. And this is coming in from the chat, and this person said that you might have said it, but they didn't catch it. But how did you tell how many years ago the pollen was from? Was it just a matter of digging down to a certain distance?
That's a very good question. So archaeologists often use what's called radiocarbon dating. So you can take organic material, so material from like plants or bones, something that was once living, and you can put it through a process. I can't give you all the details because I don't know them all, it's very technical. And it will tell you how old it is based on the amount of carbon-14 that is still in that piece of organic material. And so what I did was within the, if you look back, of course, I'm having trouble here going backwards now. Okay. In this top picture here, you can actually see one of the pollen cores that I took out. So this is all the bog material. And then I took little slices out of that and processed it to put it on the slide. Well, at the same time, I took little slices of that in the same spots and submitted that to get radiocarbon dated. And that gave me the date it helped me date how old some of that pollen was that I was looking at. That's a really good question though. And you can see that on the pollen diagram as well. On the bottom, it says going back in time. So as you go left to right, things are getting older. Okay. So one thing I want to emphasize, and as I'm finishing up here, is that archaeology is both a science and a humanity, okay? You ask questions, we have hypotheses, we make, when we excavate or do pollen analysis, we make observations and take measurements, we test our theories, and it's very much a science in that we really look systematically at the data. But it's also a humanity, and by that I mean it's related to people, and there's more to it than just the data. You have to think about, I have the word here, multivocality, and that means multiple voices. So when I talked about like indigenous communities and the belief systems of particular areas, it's really important to work with those communities if you're going to be excavating or if you're going to be researching, and get their story. What do they believe about this land? And maybe it isn't the same as what the archaeology says, but that doesn't matter. It's important that both of those voices are heard. And that's the same thing with descendant communities. So people who maybe are descendants of the cultures that you're excavating, and keeping that in mind. And one thing that the United States does to help with that is there's a law called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And that is working with Native American communities to ensure that their graves and other materials that are associated with burials are treated with respect and returned to the tribes after they've been excavated. And so archaeologists who work in the United States have to work very closely with these communities in order to be sensitive to their beliefs and their history and their needs. And so it's important to keep those things in mind. And so just some final thoughts here, just to conclude my journey going from an archaeologist to now working in 4-H with all of you in Maine. First, knowledge and learning are important and valuable. So if you're thinking about majoring in archaeology or philosophy or science, biology, whatever, just learning and gaining that knowledge, that's really valuable. And your area of study doesn't have to define everything about you. And I struggled with that a little bit. After getting my PhD, I struggled finding a job in archaeology, and it really bothered me because it's like, well, this is what I've done with my life. But then I came to realize that that doesn't define me, and I have more than one passion. And some of my passions lie in working with the community and working with youth. And so that's where I ended up getting my profession. And then remember too, that whatever path you choose, whether it's going to college or not, or getting a master's degree or whatever, there's gonna be detours. You're not gonna want them, but they're gonna happen. You're gonna change your mind about what you wanna do or how you wanna do it. And then there's gonna be unexpected opportunities that you'll find that maybe you weren't planning to go in this direction, but there's this great opportunity and maybe I should take it and see what happens. And so just keep those things in mind, that you dedicate a lot of your life to going to school, but that doesn't have to define what you do with your life. And this final image here is a tattoo that I got on my leg after I completed my dissertation. It is the Salmon of Knowledge, and one of the most numerous pollen grains that I found while I was doing my research was hazel. It was everywhere in ancient Ireland. And a big part of Irish mythology is the salmon of knowledge. And he gained his knowledge by eating hazelnuts from the tree of knowledge. And so I felt like it was a really perfect way to sum up my journey, working in Ireland, counting lots of hazel pollen, and in the process gaining knowledge. So I hope you enjoyed my talk. I talked a little bit longer than I intended. And so I hope you have some questions for me. And let's see. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we can give people a couple minutes to see if they have any questions. I think it's pretty exciting that you've gotten to travel a lot too. It's
yeah, that's one of the benefits of being an archaeologist, is that archaeology happens in a lot of places. And so there's an opportunity to travel to those places to excavate.
I'm getting some thank yous in the chat box. Not sure, Jesse, are any questions coming in at this point?
Oh, it looks like, what was your favorite school subject, or as a kid or as a teen?
Oh, good question. So I really enjoyed social studies because of history. So that was, I mean, in middle school and in high school, you know, you get history and learning about, you know, American society, but also other parts of the world. So I always really enjoyed that. And I enjoyed English as well, because, you know, with writing and reading and those types of things. It's funny enough, science, although I enjoyed it, was not necessarily my top class. It wasn't until I really got into archaeology that I started doing more of that science.
And we just got another question, and I think this one might be interesting to everyone on here. Do you know if there are opportunities for youth to try out archaeology?
I know that around the country there are. I am new to Maine, and so I am not, off the top of my head, I am not aware of what opportunities exist, but I am sure they do exist. There is an anthropology department at the University of Maine, and so they would certainly be a good resource for finding out about those opportunities. I think a Google search might do it for you. The universities often have archaeology, either field schools for their undergraduates or open days for people to come and learn. So I would definitely explore some of the different colleges to see if they offer any of those things for high schoolers and the public. And certainly
this is Laura. I just put my email address in the chat box. I'm happy to help make those connections to the archaeology department at the University of Maine if anybody is interested in that.
And museums would be good resources as well. And throughout New England, I think, you know, Massachusetts would be a great resource as well. Anything else?
Looks like that's it for questions.
I'm going to go ahead and launch our evaluation questions. This really helps us determine if we're doing the right thing here. And we appreciate everybody coming out today, especially Dr. McDonald. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this afternoon. Next week, we have Dr. Carissa Tilbury. She's in the College of Engineering at the University of Maine, and I'm really intrigued. I'm not quite sure how her talk's going to go, but she's going to talk about lights and lasers and cellular and tissue physiology. So human cells and tissues, and how lights and lasers can tell about health. So a bit of engineering and human health next week. We have a few more sessions already scheduled, from engineering to GPS and mapping of natural resources. And registration for those webinars is online at our website now. I'm having a little problem with Zoom right now. I was going to share a link to that website. But you all found us today.
The chat box.
Thank you, Jesse. You all found us today. It's at the same website where you went to register for today's webinar. And we would love to see you back here again next week. So I want to say stay safe, everybody. Keep washing your hands often. And I do hope we see you here again next week. Thanks so much for coming out today.